When solving one-step linear inequalities, there's usually two parts that you have to do. First, you have to actually solve the linear inequality, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Solving inequalities is very, very similar to solving equations. But the other thing we want to focus on right now is actually graphing your solutions. So far, we've been working with equations, and we said something like x equals 2. Well, that means if we were to look at a number line here, here's the 2, that's right. Well, that's what x is. X equals it. Just that dot right there. With inequalities, though, inequalities are something like this. All real numbers less than 2. If I wanted to take all real numbers less than 2 and write it as a mathematical inequality, I'm just going to use a variable to represent all real numbers, like x. And we want to say that all of our real numbers here, x, are less than 2. So this inequality right here we can graph. There's 3 steps to graphing it. The first thing you do is you take your number here, 2, and you put a circle on the number line. The second thing you do is you decide if it's an open or closed circle. By open or closed, this is an open circle here. Closed is when you fill it in. The way we know if it's open or closed is by the symbol. If it's less than or greater than, it's open. If it's less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, that's when we close it. Okay? So, if we're talking about all the numbers less than 2, just less than, we leave it open. The third thing you need to do is you need to draw an arrow in the direction of your solutions. Well, if we're all talking about all the values less than 2, all of these values over here are less than 2. So from the top of your circle, you just draw an arrow to the left. Notice this inequality kind of points you in the direction that you're going to draw your arrow. You can use that. I just caution you. If you see something that looks like this, 2 is greater than x, you couldn't use this idea of, oh, the inequality is pointing to the right, I draw my arrow to the right. When your variable's on the left, you can follow that rule. 2 is greater than all the real numbers. 2 is greater than all our solution. This graph here actually represents this as well. Okay, so if you want to draw your arrow in the direction, whatever direction the inequality is pointing, you can do that as long as your variable lies on the left side of the inequality. Let's take a look at another example. All real numbers greater than -2. So again, we're going to say all real numbers represented by our variable x. This time they're greater than -2. To graph this, you go to your number line. Step 1 says draw a circle on the number line at your number, -2. The second step says you have to decide whether it's an open or closed circle. Well, this just says greater than, and greater than means it's open. And we're talking about all the values greater than -2. Well, which side of the circle shows the values greater than -2? This side. 0 is bigger than -2, 2 is bigger than -2, so is 4. So we draw our arrow to the right. If you look here, all real numbers less than or equal to 1. So all real numbers. Now we have less than or equal to. That's less than with a line underneath it, because it can be less than and it can be equal to, and our 1. To graph, do the same thing. Come to your number line. Draw a circle on the 1. Remember, 1 would be between 0 and 2 here. Decide if it's open or closed. In this case, since we're talking about less than or equal to, we actually fill in the circle because it can be equal to 1. And then we're talking about all the numbers less than 1. Well, the numbers to the left of 1 are the ones that are less than, so you draw your arrow to the left. And for our last example here, it says all real numbers greater than or equal to 0. So all real numbers represented by our x greater than or equal to 0. To graph this, you come to the number line at 0 and you draw a circle. Then you decide if it's open or closed. In this case, it'll be closed. And since we're talking about all the numbers bigger than 0, we draw our number line to the right. We draw our line to the right. These colorful lines here, they represent all the solutions to these problems. Inequalities are different in equations. When we had an equation, we said something like x equals 2, period. That's it. It's equal to 2, nothing else. Well, here though, x can be less than 2. So x can be 0, x can be a -4, x can be a -1001. So there's a lot of solutions. There's actually a whole set of solutions. So the way we represent that is with the inequality and with the graph. Let's look at an example. Steve was sure he didn't score less than 73% on his algebra test. Write an inequality to describe Steve's possible score and graph the inequality. Okay, he was sure he didn't score less than 73 on his algebra test. So we have our 73. And again, use a variable to represent it. Maybe since we're talking about scores here, I'll use S. It doesn't matter what variable you use. Now we have to decide what inequality symbol to put in between the S and the 73. We have less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. If you're not sure, try some examples. Let's say Steve got a 70 on his test. Does that make sense? If he's sure he didn't score less than 73, well, then he couldn't have scored 70. He's got to score more than 73. So even though they throw that word less than out here, they also have this, he didn't score less than. So that means he had to score greater than 73. So we're going to put the greater than sign in between. Now, can it be equal to? We know it has to be greater than, but can it be equal to? Well, if he didn't score less than 73, that means he probably could have scored 73. So we need to say that this is greater than or equal to. Okay? So his score is bigger than or equal to 73. He didn't score any less than 73. Now the second part here says to graph it. So when you graph it, I'm not looking for big long number lines. I don't require that you put a 0 on it, although it's nice. Basically, put a number or 2 on either side of the number line. You might want to add a couple more, but this is fine. If we wanted to graph this, remember, you put a circle on the number line, step 1, at 73. Then you can decide if it's open or closed. Since it can be equal to 73, we fill in the circle because we want it to touch the line at 73. And we're talking about all the numbers bigger than 73. Well, what's bigger than 73? 72 or 74? Hopefully you're saying 74. So we draw our line to the right. Again, be careful when you're dealing with inequality symbols. I know they can sometimes be confusing in which ones to use. So if it helps, use some examples. And then when you graph, remember your 3 steps. Circle on the number line at the number, decide if it's open or closed, and the final step is to draw the arrow in the correct direction.